So this next session is going to be focused more on the fundraising side of DAOs. DAOs have a lot of different applications, funding public goods, funding all different matter of things. And that's what we're going to dive into. So I'm very excited to welcome to the stage first Priyanka Desai, the Chief Operating Officer of Tribute Labs, Rebecca Lamis, the co-founder of UnicornDAO, and Kevin Owocki, the founder of Gitcoin. All right, so a lot to cover here. I'm going to try not to overwhelm our audience, and I'm also going to try not to quiz you all too much. But we are talking about fundraising and DAOs. If you've heard of Gitcoin, Gitcoin is kind of one of the projects at the center of a really exciting model with quadratic funding, if you know what that is. But I'm wondering maybe if we could start with you, Kevin, if you could talk a little bit about some of the different ways in your time in the space you've seen different DAOs try to organize around fundraising.
Yeah, totally. Well, I guess the place to start would be the DAO, which collapsed in spectacular fashion several years ago. And I think that what the community learned from that was that DAOs were possible, but you needed to have sort of a simple smart contract coding area. And I think that the next really epoch in DAO building was started by DAO, which just had a very simple rule set, and therefore there was less of a surface area for an attacker to find and to be able to exploit the system. And then from there, when we saw DeFi summer and we saw the rise of NFTs, you started to see the compound style governance system launch, and then NFTs as a fundraising vehicle. And in the background of this, Gitcoin Grants has been quietly doing quadratic funding, crowdfunding. So there's quite a plurality of mechanisms for capital formation in DAOs in the space, and I expect that it will only continue to grow.
Sweet. And we're also talking in this session about collective action, like writ large. So maybe it'd be good to pass things over. I took some notes here because I want to keep this structured and also try to cover as much ground as we can. But so it doesn't seem too formal. Pri, maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the frameworks that you've seen emerge in your time at Tribute.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple DAOs that Tribute specifically focuses on, and I would say, at least at this moment, it's been more investment-based DAOs, meaning people will pool together their capital and through governance internally and voting through Snapshot or other third-party kind of voting on-chain mechanisms, they can allocate that capital for investments, whether that be venture style investing, collecting NFTs, but really the general purpose is to create a for-profit entity. I think that there's a world of DAOs, much like general corporations that exist, that have different mandates, different structures. Like anything, I think things get divided in product and services. So, for and what we're doing with Tribute Labs and our DAOs, I would say that they're, more on the traditional vehicle, let's invest together. But then there's also DAOs that we're seeing, and they're been labeled service DAOs, meaning people will come together and band together. They might get a little bit of capital going and decide hey, let's do a design guild, and we're a bunch of web designers, and we can get together, freelance, do third-party work, and kind of create a ring around this community. And so that could be a service guild. There's also guilds of individuals that are building in the metaverse. So I think this guild service DAO model is definitely emerging as well. Of course, we have protocol DAOs as well. So I feel that's more on the product side of things, where you have DAOs that are governed by a token, and they build different things together. So I think just thinking about DAOs in different ways. I'm sure there's the public service grant-based DAOs. I think there's just a wide array of DAOs. So just trying to understand the different types of DAOs that exist is a really interesting framework to start with when you're thinking about how people can collectively act online. And so I think, yeah, it's really going to be purpose-driven based on these DAOs. And some of what we've seen with our DAOs, because they are investment-based, is you just have these communities that form. They self-select into this. They put their capital up, and then they decide, hey, maybe we want to, with Flamingo, which is one of the DAOs that we help support, collect different NFTs. We have some that do early-stage investing, which is very akin to the original DAO that Kevin was talking about, bringing that to life in a way that doesn't spectacularly fail, but rather, people can pull together capital and invest in early stage, seed stage projects. So I just think that there's different types of DAOs that exist, and we hear DAOs, it's kind of a scary term. We think autonomous. Personally, I don't think we're like, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I don't think they're fully autonomous at all. Yeah, but I think it's really good to just like level set and understand that DAOs can mean a lot of different things, and acting collectively can also mean a lot of different actions.
Yeah, that's actually something I want to dive into in a little bit. But first, Rebecca, I know you're focused on more of like an inclusion-focused area of this whole DAO movement, and it's one thing to kind of create a DAO and call it decentralized, but you need to somehow create that decentralized community. Like it's going to start small. It's got to start somewhere. I'm curious, like, what your approach has been to both build community, but also build community focused around certain attributes.
Yeah, definitely. One of the biggest things I recommend to people when they're talking about starting a DAO is find your core contributors first. Find those people that are ready and have the same mindset as you for starting this organization. And maybe not everyone would agree, but we see a lot of DAOs that like publicly launch via social media. Tens of thousands of people end up in the Discord, but then it's really hard for the DAO itself to organize without kind of having a collective agreement off the get-go on how we want to run this DAO, where the financials go, how the decentralized governance works. So for UnicornDAO, for example, when me and my co-founder were getting it going, we actually talked to Tribute Labs to potentially launch it with them, because we love the model of, you start small, you find those core members that are really ready to put in the time and energy and effort and figure out how to build this DAO to allow it be for the larger community. So something that we've started creating since launching in March is we're starting to build what we call our Unicorn Network. So it's all of the creatives, artists, leaders in this space. We have folks like Sia and Grimes who have joined now via the network, who are able to be involved in the DAO as well. And they aren't necessarily contributing capital, but there's another way for them to organize within our community. So I definitely, I really recommend to anyone that's getting a DAO started, find community members that have the same mindset. Just talk to them, see if they're interested in working on this with you. Find other DAO leaders who have experience doing this, because I think there's a lot of DAOs that get started without a lot of history of building DAOs or a lot of knowledge, and the DAO world is so new either way, but finding those advisors and those community members, Pri and Aaron were a great example for me and Nadia when we were getting UnicornDAO going. So, I think that's what I really recommend when you're starting to build that DAO, is find those key people before you prep to launch it.
Yeah, so maybe to take things in a different direction, I'm curious to hear each of your opinions on whether DAOs are, so we have the future of fundraising and collective action here. Another framing of DAOs that you might have heard in the last session is just as the future of the corporation. Like DAOs is what everything is going to be. Comcast will be a DAO, Google will be a DAO. I'm curious to go down the line and just hear, maybe starting with you, Pri, what you think about that sort of characterization of DAOs and their future. Like, are they the future of the corporation?
I think that they're an evolution of the corporation, but I don't think that every corporation is necessarily well suited to be a DAO. Like, I don't think like some hardcore manufacturing on the ground business is well suited for a collective community. Maybe a piece of it, maybe you could kind of splinter off or spin out like a DAO of that larger organization. I mean, I don't know, I'm making it up, but like there's a lot of the corporate venture arms of a lot of these big like companies, maybe that part could be a DAO. I don't know. Or like the hardcore community of whatever Pepsi wants to do, they could do a DAO. That's a part of that. I think that sometimes centralization is important for certain companies. I'm not saying that like DAOs are applicable to every corporation. I think that, again, I'm kind of repeating myself, but I do think they could be used in some capacity. I think that they're well suited for the future of corporations and online communities. And I think what the internet did a really good job of was unlocking information, making, social media, for better or worse, has been able to connect individuals from all over the world. And so the natural extension of that like collective information sharing, and whether that be Reddit or other Discord communities, I think is really doing something special together with capital, and I think crypto makes it very easy to coordinate that capital. And so I think when it comes to mandates like that, like if you have a community and you really want to do something special when it comes to grant giving or invest together or create like a guild, as I was noting before, that services the metaverse, whatever it is, I think that is perfectly well suited. So anything really digitally based or internet based, I think is perfect for a DAO. I think not every corporation necessarily it makes a ton of sense, but I mean we hear a lot of people saying that DAOs are the future, which I think they very much are, but I think it's more singularly focused to like the future of online coordination.
Maybe rather than going down the line, I actually want to jump to you, Kevin, because we had a conversation, I think yesterday, around this sort of like centralization vector of things. I don't know how to frame this, but I brought up, at Google, for example, they got 200,000 people working there.
Right.
Why is that not a DAO? That's more people than probably any DAO with active contributors. So can you talk about how you see the forces, moving towards centralization or decentralization, like we spoke about yesterday?
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, I think that this is a special question for me because we're turning a large part of the Gitcoin company into a DAO right now. And I kind of view DAOs as just digital organizations. And when you think about it that way, companies are just kind of like a subset of DAOs, which are a superset. Like companies are just kind of like DAOs that run on non-current Turing complete legal frameworks and only in a specific jurisdiction. And DAOs are global and are settled to the Ethereum network, which is, I think we can complain about gas fees all day long, but way cheaper than flying to New York and suing someone. So anyway, we're taking Gitcoin grants and we are moving all of the IP and the people who are working on that to the Gitcoin DAO. And I think that there's sort of two different ways that you can have a genesis of a DAO. One is the urine style, just primordial soup. We've got on-chain flows, and we're going to organize around how we're going to organize from the primordial soup and build this structure that's got decentralized governance in it. And Gitcoin's just going a completely different route where we're taking the company and we're kind of like putting it on chain, and then we're going to progressively decentralize the governance, the computation, and the development from there. And I'm just extremely pragmatic in taking it one step at a time and iterating towards that future, which is a decentralized digital organization. But before we do that, I think we have to become just a digital organization first.
Yeah. And now jumping to you, Rebecca. Like we talk about all these different models towards decentralization. We talk about all of these different frameworks around how these communities are supposed to coordinate. But I think that it's confusing for me getting to actually get started with one of these things. It's odd. We're talking about tokens. There's like some of them are just a Telegram group. Sometimes you have to stake things. Like it's very weird for most people. And I'm curious if and how you've thought about improving accessibility to these new sorts of tools in your work.
Yeah, definitely. I personally feel one of the biggest failures of Web3 crypto at large is since 2012, there hasn't been a lot of collective action from leaders to make it more accessible, to build that educational programming and onboarding to allow everybody to access this technology and tools. And I do think what's really interesting about NFTs specifically is it's opened up a whole new world of the population of the world to come into this space. And so now what we're seeing, especially with DAOs, is it's a whole new form of collective ownership and collective action. And I think, one of the best use cases of DAOs that have barely even begun is, applying DAOs to co-ops, unions, nonprofits, other like collective governance organizations that already exist out there, but they can't necessarily scale globally because they aren't able to connect with each other universally. And I think what's really fascinating about the DAO model is now it builds in and implements that technology that allows for a more natural decentralized governance that scales. And so a lot of what I do my work on and focus on is how you just make this language accessible. I think as you're saying, you can talk a lot about the tokenomics, the currency aspects of your organization, how you go about fundraising, et cetera. But for the everyday person, realistically, that's going to go over their head, and it just makes it more scary. And I think there's already a large amount of corporate propaganda against cryptocurrency at large for numerous reasons. But as we're kind of talking, I do truly believe this is the evolution of corporate America and the next step of corporations. So with that, it's just an absolute priority, in my opinion, for everyone to be taking the time and energy to be able to provide fundraising, resources, accessibility to communities that don't necessarily access this. Like, I think Gitcoin is a great example that has been doing that through their Gitcoin grant program and helping launch organizations and entities through their network. It's definitely one of the largest. And so I really hope to see that as we continue to scale and grow our wealth collectively, we see more activations by the leaders in this space to do similar work, because at the end of the day, I'll always say community, females, non-binary, queer, BIPOC communities, they don't need empowerment. They need resources, they need finances, they need structural support. So, I just hope we continue to see that trend. And I think it's definitely become a much larger conversation in the last couple of years. But I think that's definitely, we have to do it over the next 10 years, or we're just going to see what happened with the dot-com bubble happen again with our community, which is a shame because everyone says this is for everyone. And, we've got to truly own it and make it for everyone collectively.
Sure. We've kind of talked in the abstract, I know in this session about DAOs, because I know in the last session they got a little bit more concrete. But when we talk about DAOs, like we've kind of hovered around, it means a lot of different things. Pri, you spoke about that just like a minute ago. Like, there's Discord groups, there's Telegram groups, there's voting, there's all these different blockchains where that voting might take place. There's tokens, there's staking. And Pri, you work on a lot of the tools and frameworks that a lot of these DAOs are going to be adopting over the coming years to create these systems. I'm curious, what are the biggest gaps that you see right now in for these DAOs in pursuance to collective action and fundraising?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think there's obviously on the technical side a ton of things that could be improved. Gas is a good example of that, but like they've built Snapshot to assist with that voting. I would actually, and maybe this is because I sit more on the operation side, so I have like a bent towards this, but I do think a lot of it is just being able to structure some of these like soft factors that may not even be fully technical. Like how do we surface up information to members who may not be able to fully focus on this, or this is their part-time thing? How do we make decisions together? How do we actually do the day-to-day kind of operations, and how do we optimize for that? I think tooling, we're at least with Tribute, we see those pain points, so then we're starting to build tooling and rolling that out to our DAOs. Because we see these specific pain points of just engagement between the members. I think there's also, especially now as the world has opened up, these organizations are, and ours are, I'm speaking more in the context of just investment DAOs, but they're pretty sticky, organizations. And by sticky, I mean these people become very close friends with one another. How do we get them to better engage with one another? So, I mean, it's a little bit vague, but I think trying to translate these relationships digitally in the physical realm, I think is going to be super impactful. And so that's something that I'm trying to focus on as well. I think obviously in crypto, these conferences, because we're all in a way, just all around the world here, these conferences are a great way to do it, but how do we elevate that? And I think we're seeing DAOs based on specific NFT memberships. So you have a card that gives you maybe additional utility to redeem some sort of NFT, but then there's also these physical experiences that you could partake in. And I think on the tooling side, there's definitely things that we're figuring out, but also just on these soft relationship building things. How do we harness the power that people are creating digitally in a way that's long-term sustainable? Because I mean, I've seen a lot of DAOs even just in the beginning of the last couple of years kick off and then they flame out. And so how do we make sure that these stick for 10 to 20 to 30 years?
Yeah. You mentioned the NFT side of things, and I'm going to toss it over to you, Kevin. There's a lot of different structures that are emerging for DAO governance. There's like the new like exciting model has been this whole optimism. I don't know if you've all followed that. It's a roll up on Ethereum. It's a scaling solution, but they've introduced this whole new model that's bicameral. So on one side, you've got like two houses. You've got on one side a token house, which anybody can really join, and you can vote with your tokens. And then on the other side, it feels to me more like in terms of like the US, and my analogy is like the Senate. Like there's NFTs that are assigned to individual people, and those people decide who gets added into this group. And both of these groups have different responsibilities and so on and so forth. But I just mentioned this to give you a sense of there's a lot of different ways that DAOs are thinking about how they should use NFTs and tokens for governance. Kevin, I'm curious if you've seen any models that you're excited about, and maybe to start out, like, what do you think that there are any limitations to the traditional, if you can call it that, token-based governance model where people just have tokens and vote with those tokens?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that the criticism that I've seen from Vitalik and others is that token-based governance collapses towards plutocracy because you're prioritizing the preferences of whoever has the biggest bag. And I think that optimism and the work that they've done with the token house and the citizens house is designed to imbue and separate the interests of the capital holders in the token house and then the interests of the citizens in the citizens house. And it's just very cool that they're sort of formalizing these different stakeholders into their own governance mechanisms. And then, just like in the United States, when there's a negotiation between the House and the Senate about a bill, I'm assuming that they'll have a similar sort of thing in optimism. And the optimism team is just really far. They're doing quadratic voting in their citizens house already, which is cool. And so just really proud of the work that they've been doing in order to do that. I do think that yeah, so it's basically token voting is like, the criticism is that it collapses to just the preferences of capital, and I think you need to find ways to imbue the citizens into the system, and optimism is the best experiment I've seen in that.
Can you really quickly talk, I'm sure you have a pretty good quick explanation of quadratic funding for people who aren't familiar, because that's your approach at Gitcoin towards fixing those plutocracy.
Yeah, totally. So basically every quarter on Gitcoin, we give away $3 million. Not every quarter, but this quarter it's $3 million. And basically the idea is that we're matching contributions from the crowd to various Gitcoin grants based off of the number of contributors to each grant instead of the amount that's been put in. So again, we're optimizing for the preferences of the poor and the many instead of the rich and the few, just the capital holders. And it's deeply cool because it gets you over, like if you give $1, sometimes these grants can be matched with $100 or $150. So it's a way of creating, it feels like a crowdfunding campaign on the front, but it's actually a way of governing where capital goes, because which projects are people willing to give $1 to is actually a good proxy for what the community that you're serving cares about. So it's a way of creating decentralized governance that kind of is resistant to just the preferences of only capital. And we're one of the biggest experiments of it. There are other experiments like CLR Fund that's doing it. Giveth is playing with some of these ideas too. But it's actually in a mechanism by Glenn Weil and Vitalik Buterin and Zoe Hitzig, and we're just the ones that are bringing it to market.
Sure. And there's like a lot of really interesting history too. Like you guys, if anybody wants to look it up afterwards, you guys have kind of had to test the model in a lot of different ways over the years. Like I remember your first couple of rounds that were, I don't know, it's just a really interesting thing to look at how they've gotten to where they are.
Yeah, and the one last thing I'll say about that is that we're taking our 3 years of testing and what we've learned, and we're packaging it up into what we're calling Gitcoin Grants 2.0. And if anyone out there is running a DeFi or DAO ecosystem and wants to just drop in quadratic funding alongside your existing grants program, please reach out to me. We would love to help you do quadratic funding in your community.
Thanks. Cool. So, Kevin, you spoke a little bit about that quadratic funding right there, like I asked. Thank you for that. But it's focused towards public good. So the idea of like funding things that benefit, a plurality of people. I'm curious, Rebecca, to hear how you can create a DAO that rewards something to its creators beyond just like, hey, here's a token will go up in value. How are you working towards that?
Yeah, definitely. Some of the most common models I've started to see is contribution just via other cryptocurrencies, Ethereum, in addition to the token of the DAO itself. I think that's a really wise model. I think I really love governance models that build in kind of collective leaders occasionally, in the sense that maybe it's a 3-month leader who runs marketing or events and then is compensated for that additional time. I think it's a really clever way to have more tight roles and specific roles with great contribution and compensation. And then in addition to that, I definitely think a really wise model is a way to track the time and energy that individuals are putting into the DAO and how you can compensate via that, via tokens, crypto, et cetera. And then finally, I think some of the smartest models are the ones that figure out how to allow the contributors to come in and out of the DAO. So not necessarily, I would say compensating them long term, but figuring out models in which if you are someone who's really excited about working on a specific project, that there is enough benefit within your specific ecosystem to compensate them, support them, et cetera, at the time when they're ready to be present with the DAO. And I think that's one of the wisest ways that you can build contributors within your organization, is by figuring out a model that allows your community members to come in and out as they have different interests within the DAO.
Awesome. Now we're coming up on time. One last question for you. I was going to say a quick question. We can try to make it quick. But I realize I haven't really asked this, which is, sorry to give this one to you, but is there any specific characteristic that an organization must have to be called a DAO? What makes something a DAO? Is it a token? Is it using Discord?
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah, maybe we should have started that.
I know. Yeah, it was written down, and
No, I'm kidding. Hopefully people know what a DAO is. So I like loose definitions. It's like when people talk about the metaverse, I'm like, yeah, Twitter is the metaverse. It's just like anything. I would say something similar to a DAO. My favorite definition, I think this is pretty apt, is basically just a community with a shared bank account and governance, very lightweight governance. I think really a lot of things can be DAOs, anything really. I think even fantasy football leagues, I think in some ways could be DAO. I think Wikipedia is a DAO in many ways. There's self-governed community. There's no capital per se, but I think it leans pretty heavily as far as DAOs. So that's kind of my very lightweight definition of a DAO. Yeah.
Cool. All right, 7 seconds left. Can you all go through really quickly and tell all these nice people how they can keep up with what you're working on and where they should go? Maybe start with you, Kevin.
You can Google Gitcoin. We finally aren't auto-corrected to Bitcoin on Google. That's how you find me.
My Twitter is just @Rebecca Lamis. If you ever have any questions, happy to answer DMs.
Yeah, Tribute Labs is tributelabbs.xyz if you want to get a sense of the DAOs that we help with, and then my Twitter is Desai.
Sweet. Read CoinDesk for me.
One last shill. Gitcoin grants round 14, $3 million worth of matching the next week and a half. So if you are going to Google us, do it in the next week because there's matching available.
All right. Well, on that note, thanks to our awesome guests.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.